Welcome to this episode of Midlife Men with me, Philip Briscoe. Today I'm joined by David Westgate. David worked in advertising for 35 years, all the while suffering from a mental illness known as Bipolar 1. So welcome, David.
Thank you, Philip.
So I'm guessing you didn't always know that you were suffering from bipolar disorder. I wonder how you could, I wonder if you can explain how did you start to, what did that look like in your life?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was a younger man, now, I'll just say this. I've been with my wife for 51 years, 10 years going out. So we were actually the old classic school sweethearts. I mention that because it's given me somebody a really good benchmark to say, I think this started then. I think you were happening. This was going on. So given that, I think I started noticing symptoms when I was probably in about my mid-20s, which could be a very natural time for this sort of illness to kick in. And at first, and for many, many years, the only thing I really noticed was some really bad depression. Because bipolar 1, being a bit of a roller coaster one, it comes with deep, deep suicidal depressions, periods of normality, and then the occasional absolutely quite amazing but often highly destructive manic highs. But when you're younger, you're aware that you're going through depression. But when I actually look back and think, wow, I think I was experiencing a manic high then, you see it as happiness because you don't go, oh, this must be something weird, because you're going after months of depression. You're suddenly going, I'm feeling pretty good. And then you go, whoa, I'm really feeling good. And I used to think to myself, oh, so this is happiness. This is what everybody raves about. And when you have no experience of it, it's very hard to put your finger on it and go, no, this is part of your mental illness. So it was, the big things that stood out for me was depression.
I know you've previously talked about a kind of day in the life of the sorts of things you experience. What does your day look like, just to give us an idea of how how does this manifest?
Well, a day now is a very normal, boring day because I'm incredibly well medicated. And I've got a lot to say that I think boring normal is a fantastic way to have it. But when I was really in the throes of my illness, it was a very unpredictable thing. Sleep was always terrible. So there was a real feeling of exhaustion. Even when you were manic, you'd also have elements of anxiety. So sleep was hard. Dragging is like you'd spend a couple of hours a night at least, if not more, lying wide awake, working out what you were going to do for the next day and worrying yourself sick about it. Then you drag yourself from bed exhausted, head off to work, realize that everything you were worrying about that night was no bigger problem than, half an hour and everything was fixed, but you'd be physically exhausted. I used to steal out to my car occasionally to have an afternoon nap, and I had a couple of really good friends that I trust. I said, will you give me a ring? Will you give me a ring after about an hour? And a few of those times I slept straight through those alarms and virtually slept all afternoon in my car. So what they were thinking it worked, I don't know. But throughout the day, I was a brilliant actor. I was better than Robert De Niro, Brad Pitt, Ryan Gosling, all rolled into one, because I'd walk through the doors of those advertising agencies and I was the happy professional, like nothing to see here sort of like, and people worked with me for years and never once suspected, never once said, everything all right? You seem a bit odd at the moment. But that sort of thing also led to the fact you'd go home physically exhausted, angry, grumpy, and your wife would pay the price for you not being medicated or whatever. And then you go to bed literally later that night and force yourself to stay awake as long as you possibly could, because you were praying that night you would sleep. And you would go for weeks on end where you just be... I used to wake up wide awake at 3 a.m. right on the knocker. It was like I'd set an alarm in my head, and then I wouldn't be able to get back to sleep for a couple of hours. And it just made for one hell of a mess. It really was. How I managed to work through it, I don't know.
So when you were lying awake at night, what was it? Anxiety? What was stopping you sleeping?
A lot of anxiety. You'd wake up and you'd sort of think to yourself, get back now. But within about 20 seconds of feeling awake, I'd have a to-do list running through my head. And it was always, what if the client doesn't like this? What if we stuff that up? What if that goes wrong? It was a negative to-do list. And you would run and run. And also what happens, especially with depressions, you do a thing that's called ruminating, which means you just go round and round and round with the same thought, even though you know you're fully aware of it. And I think that's one of the great frustrations with mental illness, I should say, is you're aware of these things going on, but you are beyond being able to control them. So I'd spend a couple of hours worried, head off to work, and then realise, by 9:30 in the morning, I go, well, there was really nothing to worry about. And yet, the next night, you do the same thing again. I've actually spoken to a lot of guys who have been through a lot of pressure, and they go, I wake up at 3 a.m. So I don't know why, but it seems to be one of the bewitching hours for people with mental illnesses.
So when you put on your kind of mask and your happy mask, was that part of the highs, or was that just pretending everything was okay?
No, that actually, I think I was fortunate because I worked in advertising. So manic highs for me, you become really productive. You don't need much sleep. Suddenly you're going, I can get by on 2 hours sleep a night. This is fantastic. And I don't think people, especially being in advertising, particularly noticed. I think they just went, wow, look at this guy. Look how productive he is. So I didn't really need to put on a mask then. It was mainly the depressions. And I can remember times when you'd be in with a client and presenting to them and do really well. And then on the way back to the office, you'd slip into toilet cubicle to have a good cry. And there was never, you couldn't put your finger on it. It wasn't like, oh, my dog's died or something, I'm very upset. It was just depression, just oozing out of you.
So you were really not in control of your emotions.
No, not at all. Anger, irritability, all of that sort of stuff, and real difficulty in your memories shot. It's hard to focus on things, but particularly you really got to watch yourself because of your irritability, because it's very, very easy to snap at people. And I reckon in my life, I have apologized to so many people because I've snapped at them and then gone back 5 minutes later going, I'm so sorry. I was totally and utterly out of line. I'm really, really sorry. And people would just go, what on earth is going on with this guy? Because by nature, I consider myself a fairly easygoing guy, but then this angry monster would pop out every now and then like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Did you know this was, I don't want to use the word normal, but did you know that this perhaps wasn't what other people were experiencing? I guess when it's yourself and you've only known that, you might not. I guess, what point did you think, something's not right here?
Well, I think I did because of the depressions, but I don't think I ever quite picked it up with the manic highs. But I can really clearly remember when it finally got all too much and I went, I need excellent professional help. I can no longer do this. Because what had happened when I was about 26, I saw a psychiatrist about my bleak moods, and I was just so disillusioned with it. I hated it. I felt out of place. He felt very condescending to me, and I decided, as only a foolish young man could, go, I'll handle these issues myself. And I did that for 25 years. I never reached out for help, and that was the dumbest decision of my life. But many, many years later, we were doing the classic, take the kids to Disneyland holiday. And I don't know, but in Australia, it's a big thing. You got to go, oh, off we go to America, take the kids to Disneyland. And being totally unaware of what time zones could do for your sleep and your mental health. And I got over there and I just couldn't sleep. I was miserable the entire holiday. I look at photos from that holiday and I can see, my eyes are dead. And when we were on our way home, I remember we had a couple of days stopover in Hawaii, and I said to my wife, I've never been so miserable in all my life. Got back to work, and one night I was walking down to the railway station, and it was as if I had a large battery in my back that somebody had just pulled out, and I completely and utterly, there was a lounge in a high rise, in a lobby of a high rise. I walked in, I sat down for about an hour before I could muster the strength to walk down to the station. And the next day I made an appointment to see a doctor because I just knew. And you know what it was? It wasn't up here. It was the physical exhaustion, the physical inability to do anything. And I thought, I've got to seek help because I can barely move. I could barely get out of work. And so I went along, saw a GP who's a wonderful GP who I'd seen quite a bit before. And she knows about mental health. And she just said, I can't help you with this one, but I know somebody that can. And she recommended me to a psychiatrist who I saw, this was about 15 years ago. Fantastic, completely the opposite of the guy I first saw. And life started to finally get itself back in a bit of order.
So I imagine you got a diagnosis at that point. And what did that mean, knowing that it had a name?
Well, interesting. I won't bore you with details too much, but my psychiatrist diagnosed me with depression because, as I said before, I just assumed that manic episodes were happiness. So I didn't go in and go, oh, sometimes I'm really, really down, but other times I'm really up, because I just went, well, sometimes I get lucky and I have periods of happiness. So he diagnosed me with depression. He was very good. He tried to get me through without medication for about 6 months, and it just wasn't going anywhere. And he medicated me with, what's the word for it? Antidepressants. And after about 3 weeks on these antidepressants, I took off like a rocket. I went so high. I'd never been so high. And I went back to see him and he went, oh, he said, you're not depressive. You're bipolar 1. And he finally diagnosed me. And here's where because I mentioned my wife, I always thought that when he diagnosed me, that I was incredibly happy because I finally thought, right, here we go. I can get sorted. And my wife tells me that I actually cried like a baby because I was so not happiness. I was crying like a baby because I thought, oh my God, I am one of those weirdos with a real mental illness. Because depression, well, that's acceptable. Everybody can have that. But bipolar 1, I went, what on earth is that thing? But in my mind, I was really happy. I went, fantastic. We can get on with things. And I trust my wife's judgment here far better than mine. I was absolutely shocked. I couldn't believe, because quite honestly, I thought mental illnesses were for hypochondriacs. You know, depression was acceptable for a bloke, but other things just were for losers, for loonies, you know, but let me assure you, 15 years later, I'm so glad that I got that diagnosis. I got medicated right, and I got back to some form of normality for probably the first time since I was about 26.
Do you think that attitude has changed over the years? Do you think men, especially society in general, are still thinking that, you know, any sort of mental illness is, you know, you're one of the weirdos, or do you think it's changing?
I do think it's changing, and I think the more people who can talk about these issues, I think, especially for men, it really helps other guys to go, okay, so you're not necessarily a weirdo. I do think it's changing. Um, it's slow, but it really gives me hope that when you talk to a lot of younger guys, like I'm 67, but when you talk to a lot of younger guys, they see it as a very normal part of their lives to be able to talk about this stuff. My generation, no. And most of my mates, no. You know, you can talk a bit about it, but after that you go, watch what you say, because they're only going to go, oh my God, like, and yet I know that we all every now and then suffer from something bad. But I think it's heading in the positive way.
And that's the terrible thing, isn't it? That it does still exist, and that there's still a stigma attached to it, and there shouldn't be. You know, there should be strength in admitting that you've got challenges, not weakness.
Oh, look, I couldn't agree more. And well, one of the things about stigma is that we self-stigmatize too. You have an illness, you have a depression, you have an anxiety, and you tell yourself again, you're weak, you're pathetic, you're a hypochondriac. You can't, especially when you're down and when you're really depressed and you're not thinking clearly and you can't focus and you're exhausted and your mind's like like full of fog. And the same goes for anxiety. And you go, I'm weak. So you don't need other people to go, oh, you're weak, you can't hack it, because you're doing it to yourself. And I think it's one of the great cruelties that especially men put themselves through, that they go through. I don't anymore. If I was to experience a depression, I wouldn't look at myself and go, you're weak. I just go, I'm going through a tough time. And I know that I'm incredibly strong because I've been here before, and I'm going to drag myself back out of it. But you do, especially the younger you are, and the first few times these happen, you belt yourself up inside.
And do you, in terms of now and since that diagnosis, is it principally medication that helps you?
It is a combination of things. For quite a while, it was psychiatrist, medication, psychologist, you name it. But the psychologist was brilliant. I laugh because I still recommend people to him. But I just say, look, Jeff, you were far too good. You did yourself out of the money. Because he was really helpful both to myself and to my wife. But primarily my life is now psychiatrist, not particularly often. We often just do it via phone. Quite a bit of medication. But you wouldn't, if you met me in a pub or something, you wouldn't even have a clue. You just go, oh, pretty normal old bloke. Medication. And then the boring side of things, which is, a reasonably good diet. That's not to say I don't eat pizzas or hamburgers and stuff or go for a schnitzel at the pub, but a reasonable diet, not hammering the booze too much. And don't get me wrong, I still very, very much enjoy a good drink with mates. But watching it when you can, because, booze in itself is a depressive. Drink too much of it, it's a depressive. I've got my exercise regime. I don't go to any gyms, but I do try to walk my dog for about an hour every day, and I find that great, both for me and him. So a lot of it, apart from medication, a lot of it is just what a guy my age would be doing, regardless of their mental health, if they were just trying to keep themselves going and think, I wouldn't mind at least another 10 years on the planet. It's not brain surgery.
The science behind this, is it to do with, different chemicals in the brain? What causes the disorder?
Absolutely. It's an hereditary illness. You can sort of skip generations and then belt you. And it's a complete and utter chemical imbalances in your brain. I used to, thanks to the medication, I very well, I don't have manic highs. And I can see depression's coming on, in which case I just speak to my psychiatrist and we amend the medication. But I used to, when I was older and I would get manic highs, because it used to take a day or two to hit you. You don't just go bang. But I knew I go, I'm feeling good. And then you go, I'm feeling really good. And then you go, well, I better question whether this is really good, just good happiness, or am I going manic? And when you got hit, when the mania used to hit, I swear that within my head, I could hear the chemistry changing. I honestly, I don't know whether this is just, invented, but I used to think I could hear it. And when I was younger and go through these, my doctor the only way you could try and prevent them is being really heavily sedated. And honestly, there'd be pills, I won't mention the names, but there'd be sedatives that would normally, if you took 2, you might sleep for an entire day. And yet when I was going high, I could take 6 of them and it would have no change on me whatsoever. It's such is the strength of those chemicals when they're changing. They're just going, you are now Superman and nothing's going to touch you for a month. And then, of course, everything that goes up comes down miserably into a big black hole.
That's really interesting, David, because I've heard from somebody else, actually. They said they could kind of hear the changes in the chemistry in their head.
Yeah. I'm glad you said that, because I often wondered again, am I just making it up?
Yeah, I've heard that before. And I guess, if you had a physical ailment, you would go to the doctor, right? You wouldn't live with it. But this is a physical ailment. It's a chemical imbalance. And yet, it's not perceived the same way. And people don't seem to, allocate the same level of importance, which is crazy, right?
No, I think one of the big things, and let's forget about bipolar for the moment, but even with a depression or anxiety is, they can be very hard to realize what you're going through, because they don't. It's not like COVID or influenza. Like influenza, that's got a way of sort of introducing itself. For a day or two beforehand, you go, oh, I'm tired, I'm achy, and then bang, it knocks on your door, smacks you in the face, and you're in bed, and you're as weak as a kitten. But with depression, for example, you might be up here and you just feel a bit low, and you think to yourself, oh, I'm not feeling great at the moment. But then you go, well, things are tough, like cost of living's going through the roof in Australia, mortgage rates are high. Look what's happening over in the Middle East. Why nobody's happy at the moment. And then bit by bit, because it's quite incremental, it gets lower and lower until you get to the point where you're right down at the bottom of it and you go, I can't get out of bed. I can't get out of bed. I'm crying. I'm so miserable. There's something wrong. So I think it's really handy. I often say, watch your moods like you watch the weather. Every day you get up and go, oh, well, I take an umbrella today. Do I need a jacket? Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I don't know about you, but you check the weather apps. You listen to it on the TV. You listen to the radio. If you were that disciplined with your own moods, and every now and then you just went, I'm just going to check in. How am I feeling? Well, actually, I've been feeling crap, and I've been feeling this way for a week or two. That's the time you got to go, maybe I should chat with the GP or whatever, because you go for that too long and then you go, wow, and the lower and lower you get, the harder and harder it is to crawl back out of it.
And what about, kind of sharing how you're feeling with people? I know a lot of men I've spoken to kept it to themselves. They didn't really share it with anyone. I mean, often the first time they've done that is when they've spoken to a kind of professional. In your experience, should guys be talking to, sharing to people, and who should they talk to? Because often it's not the people they might think.
No, I think when people people really, the first port of call, because it is difficult. And I know, I can't speak for other generations, but I know I would no more reach out to mates than fly. But what I should have been doing a lot earlier is reaching out to good GP and going, look, surely there's something you can do for this depression. Because there was. But I was stupid enough just to go, I'll tolerate this for 25 years because I don't think there's anything can be done about it, which was, male stupidity. But I would say, look, it still, I imagine, for a lot of blokes, it's hard to ring up a mate and go, mate, I'm really down. But I will say this, I think guys can often realise that their mates aren't travelling all that well. And I'm not talking about diagnosing them. I'm just thinking, you know what? Philip doesn't seem to be quite himself at the moment. And then they can reach out without having to talk about mental health and stuff. They don't have to diagnose them. They don't have to be a psychologist. But it doesn't take much to go, mate, I hope you don't mind me saying, but I noticed you seem a bit flat at the moment, bit tired all the time. And just seeing if you get any reaction out of that. And if you do, if somebody says, well, I'm actually feeling really low, all you've really got to say is, well, that must be pretty damn tough. Tell me about it. So I think it's probably less likely that friends will reach out to one another. But when you notice something, and look, it doesn't mean just because I notice somebody doesn't seem to be themselves, it doesn't mean they have a mental illness. They might be having a rough time in a relationship or financial strains or whatever. But either way, it's a lovely thing to be able to reach out to somebody and go, you don't seem to be quite yourself at the moment. And if they want to talk, be there to talk. That's the big thing I think we can do as blokes.
So I know that you kind of take your experience and you work a lot with people now, especially in the workplace. Do you want to talk a bit about that? You know, how did you get into that, and what are you doing?
Well, after about 35 years in advertising, which is a pretty young person's game, and I was like a dinosaur walking around agencies. Like I had an incredibly long career. But about a decade ago, I started speaking for a mental health organisation over here called the Black Dog Institute. Really excellent institute, renowned for their research in mental health. And I started speaking as a lived experience speaker for them. And I found it amazingly therapeutic. And also I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've always been a reasonably good presenter because that's how you have to be in advertising. But I really enjoyed it. And as time went on, I went, I wonder if I could actually make a living out of doing this. So I did mental health first aid training. I became an instructor in that. And then I've just sort of built, and this, believe me, I'm not buying a 70-foot yacht or buying a Porsche, but I've made a living. And I talk to a lot, especially blue collar guys, construction, mining people and stuff. And I do a lot of training, a lot of talk, and often with blue collar, and I love speaking to miners and stuff like that because you really can get through to people, even the toughest of guys. And often how I go about it is going, look, you may never have a bad day's mental health in your life, but there's a very good chance that a nephew or a niece or one of your best mates or your partner or whatever may not be so lucky. So pay attention for half an hour because you might learn something that could really help somebody else. And the one thing I know, and I'd say this is very true of English guys too, but Australian men might want to go, I'm as tough as nails. I don't need any help. But they don't want to see other people around them that they care about suffer. And they're prepared to go, I'll listen, I'll learn. Yeah, I could see that. That could be very helpful. And especially in a lot of those industries, suicide rates are through the roof. ridiculous. And I think a lot of guys are going, yep, talk to us. We need to know about this stuff.
Why do you think that is? I just did an episode actually with someone who focuses on the construction sector actually, and he said the same thing. But why, especially in Australia, I guess it doesn't matter where, why do you think that the suicide rates are so high in those sorts of industries?
I think part of it is because guys often, especially if you're like more of a, just a labourer or whatever, you're not earning great money. It's tough work. But I think also, and it's sad, but it's the same with, for example, rural people. They have access to the means. And for construction workers, for example, most construction workers die by jumping, by going off, the fourth story of a semi-completed building. Farmers, for example, often it's by, their own gun or because the thing is, over here, we have about 3,200 every year take their lives. 75% of those people are men. But the interesting thing is it doesn't mean it's just purely a male problem, because 50% of people who attempt to take their lives are females and 50% are men. But men, I can never think of the right word for it, but men end up taking their lives because they use more violent means. Women might err for, on the side of pills and that sort of thing, whereas a bloke is often going to use a gun or hang himself or go out in front of a truck or whatever, and they'll pick more violent means than women will. So some of it, like in rural places, can be down to a lot of isolation. And also, like, because, well, I don't know about over there, but rural Australia is like, you're tough. You don't complain about anything. You've just lost yet another entire year's work to a drought. Get on, pull yourself out, have a cup of concrete. So, but there's that, but it's the access to the means. They said, vets used to have high rates because the same way they put dogs and cats down, they had access to that medication. And unfortunately, a lot were using it. So suicide's not something that people necessarily want to go through. And, it's a really bad time in their life that they can survive and get through. But when you're in a really, really tough time and you've got access to that means right at your fingertips, like, it can be a whole different ballgame.
We're just listening to what you've been saying over the last couple of minutes. A lot of people will find that uncomfortable, probably not, find it difficult to listen to. But it's important, isn't it? It's raw and it's uncomfortable. But if we don't have these conversations, then it continues.
Well, I couldn't agree more, Philip. It's just, it has to be dragged out into the light. The only time we talk about suicide is when somebody's taken their life, and very rarely. And I'll just go back. If a guy won't reach out to another guy because he's really down or he's suffering from really severe anxiety, the chance of that person reaching out to say, hi, look, mate, I'm suicidal, I think is very, very rare. Most guys would never. So we have to learn how to be able to go to them and go, mate, I'm really worried about you. You think you're taking your life. And it's tough. But until we get to those points, we're not going to make a lot of change. And the thing, can I just tell you a quick anecdote? There's a guy who went off the Golden Gate Bridge. Golden Gate Bridge, most common place in America for suicide. Hardly anybody ever survives it. A guy went off in the 1990s. He went off and he survived. 3 months in hospital, hugely badly damaged. But do you know what he said as he let go of the handrail and went flying into air with no way of going back? He said, as his mind had been foggy and everything, but at that stage, as clear as a bell, he thought to himself, I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have done it. And I think that's true of a lot of people that go through suicide and survive, or suicide attempt, I should say.
Yeah, that's interesting. I did an episode with a guy called Steve Whittle, who's founded an organisation in the UK called Tough to Talk, which is aims to prevent male suicide. And he said, you have to. People will cover; they won't answer directly if you say how you're feeling. He said what you have to do is very uncomfortable, but you actually have to say, "Are you thinking of taking your own life?" Which is a difficult thing to do because then whoever you've asked does feel they have to respond. Whereas if you ask a circuitous question, how you feeling? Are you all right? Then, they can mask the answer.
Oh, yeah. Or are you thinking of doing something silly? And this person's going, this is the least silly thing I've ever done. You got to be, are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of taking your own life? Are you thinking of ending your life? You got to be blunt, really blunt. And I often think about it, I think we think about the subject of suicide as so taboo. If I am suicidal and somebody reaches out and says, are you thinking of taking your life? You may not respond and you may take your life the next week. Doesn't mean that person was in any way in fault. But you might just go, did my mate just ask about suicide? I can actually talk about this. I have somebody who's just mentioned it. Mention a topic that I thought you just could not talk about. And he's just come straight out and said, mate, are you thinking you're taking your life? It's, it could be a real, liberating moment for somebody to go, oh, what? I can talk about this.
Yeah, it's really, really important topic. And I'm glad we kind of moved into it, in our chat. So just coming back then to, just looking at, bipolar disorder, what does that look like, at a broader level? How many people does it affect? How many folks are walking around with the illness?
Oh, you've got me there. They say in Australia, 20% of adult Australians will suffer from some form of mental illness in any given year. 50% of us will seek help. And obviously, being an equal opportunity employer, it's not the same 20% of people every year. But if you've got the most common mental illnesses in Australia are anxiety disorder, depression, and substance abuse. And if you think about it, they all sort of tend to play together. If I'm really depressed, I'm anxious that I might lose my job. Guess what I do at night? Whatever my substance of choice is, but I might drink quite a bit more than I might normally because I go, it's the only time I feel relaxed. Perhaps I'm thinking it might help me sleep. But then you get off into the smaller ones, like the harder hitting, like the personality disorders and the schizophrenia and the bipolar. And it's a lot smaller percentage. What it is, Philip, you've got me. You've nailed me there. But they are quite a bit rarer. But ironically, because I do a lot of work on LinkedIn, I write a lot about mental health on LinkedIn, and you get a false sense of it because you end up speaking with so many people with bipolar because you all reach out to each other and go, oh, what's it like and everything? And you suddenly go, oh, everybody's got it. And they go, no, it's relatively rare. And thank goodness it is too.
So this has been great, David. Should we just finish up on then if you could just reiterate, what should someone do if they're suffering from similar symptoms that you've been describing that you had earlier in your life? What's your advice to them?
Yeah, sure. My advice is if you've been feeling, I don't know, miserable for 2 weeks, say, or you've been feeling really overly worried and you can't put your finger on anything. You can't go, oh, I've got to make a big presentation at work. Or you just go, I just feel so worried. Your thing to do is to reach out, is to find a doctor that understands a bit about mental health. They don't all, because that's not necessarily part of their training all that much. But be able to go and talk to a doctor. And here's the thing. There's a couple of tricks to this, I think. A lot of blokes will go to a doctor and the doctor goes, hi, how you going? He goes, oh, yeah, I'm good. And the doctor goes, well, why the hell are you here? But the other thing is too, especially with things such as depression or anxiety, men will often go in and they go, oh, look, nothing much. I've been a bit blue. I've been a bit tired. Now, a doctor, due to their training, can be very easily forgiven for going tired, bit flat. That might be an iron deficiency. And look at it from a physical point of view. If you've been feeling absolutely miserable, absolutely crap, and you found yourself crying from time to time, seeing a doctor is not the time to go, oh, I better look tough here. That's the time to go in and go, I'm miserable. I find myself crying at times, and I don't even realize why. I'm just crying. I am terrible, because you need to help that doctor understand going, oh, okay, this is a mental problem, not a physical one. And the only other thing I'd say too, if your doctor says, you know what, you could really benefit from seeing a psychologist, a lot of guys will go, whoa, hang on, wait a minute, because it's a slightly weird thing to go and see somebody. And people go, oh, they're mind readers and all of that sort of malarkey, which of course they're not. Here's what you've got to do. If you go and see a psychologist and you go, this was really awkward, give them a couple of goes. But often I think finding the right psychologist is a bit like online dating. I've never done it in my life, but I imagine I say to somebody, I'll see you at the pub. I'll be the one in the khaki green shirt, and you meet this person and you both, 2 sips into your drinks, you both think to yourself, nice person, but not for me. Doesn't mean that person's not really sweet person. Doesn't mean you're a bad person. It just means it didn't connect. And the same thing goes for psychologists. If you sit in a room and you don't feel like you're connected, just go, I've got to find another one. I need to go back to my doctor and go, hey, I need to find another one. And that can be hard when you're really physically exhausted and you're down or anything. But that's the time you do have to have a cup of concrete and harden up just to get through that, in order to allow those professionals to really sort of work their magic and get you out of the crap. So that's what you got to do.
Thank you, David. That's really good advice. Thanks for joining us today.
Not at all, Philip. Thank you for having me, mate. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Midlife Men podcast with me, Philip Briscoe. If you can relate to any of the issues David discussed in this episode, or if you or someone you know is struggling with mental health, the advice is to contact your GP. If you have a story to tell and you think your experience would help others, then do please get in contact either via the website, mid-lifemen.com, or email me at midlifemen01@gmail.com. Finally, please share the podcast with people you know and with your networks. And if you enjoyed listening, then please rate or review it and help raise its profile. And together we can reach more people who might benefit from these stories shared by my guests.